The blood on her stepfather's knuckles was still fresh when he grabbed Zelda Whitmore by her dark auburn hair and dragged her out into the December snow, and she knew this time he might actually kill her. The winter of 1878 had come early to Sonora, California, bringing with it a rare and vicious cold that transformed the gold rush town into something unrecognizable. Snow had fallen steadily for 3 days, blanketing the muddy streets and wooden storefronts in white that would have been beautiful if Zelda had any capacity left to appreciate beauty. She had turned 19 just 2 weeks prior. Not that anyone had remembered or cared. Her mother had been dead for 6 months, taken by consumption in the spring, and Harold Whitmore had wasted no time showing his true nature once the woman who had kept his worst impulses in check was gone. The pain in her scalp was blinding as he hauled her across the threshold of their small cabin on the outskirts of town. Zelda tried to get her feet under her, tried to stand, but Harold was a big man, over 6 feet tall, with the build of someone who had spent years working the mines before a cave-in had left him with a limp and a disposition that grew meaner with each passing season. He had married her mother 5 years ago, and Zelda had never trusted the way his eyes lingered on her even then when she was barely more than a child. "You think you can talk back to me?" Harold roared, his words slurring together. The whiskey on his breath had been strong even before he started dragging her. "You think you're better than me, girl?" Zelda's hands scrabbled at his wrist, trying to ease the terrible pressure on her scalp as he pulled her down the 2 wooden steps and into the snow. The cold hit her like a physical blow. She wore only her thin cotton dress, having been washing dishes when Harold had come home in one of his rages. The snow soaked through the fabric immediately, icy water seeping into her skin. "Please," she gasped, but Harold was beyond hearing. He had been drinking since morning, she could tell, and when he got like this, there was no reasoning with him. She had learned that the hard way over the past months, learning to read the signs, to make herself scarce when she could, but today she had been trapped, and when he had demanded to know where his tobacco tin was and she had truthfully said she did not know, he had backhanded her across the face hard enough to split her lip. The main street of Sonora was perhaps 200 yards from their cabin, and Harold was dragging her toward it. Zelda could see lights in windows, smoke rising from chimneys, signs of life and warmth that might as well have been 1,000 miles away. Her scalp felt like it was being torn from her skull. She could feel individual hairs ripping free, could feel the warm trickle of blood mixing with snow water on her face. "Harold, stop!" she screamed, abandoning pride and dignity in favor of pure survival. "Please, I am sorry for whatever I did." He did not stop. If anything, he moved faster, his limp barely slowing him down as fury gave him strength. Zelda's knees hit rocks hidden beneath the snow, and she felt her skin tear. Her fingernails broke as she clawed at his hand, leaving bloody crescents in his weathered skin, but he did not even seem to notice. They were close to the main street now. Zelda could see the Sonora Hotel, the general store, the saloon where piano music drifted out into the cold air. There were people around despite the weather, bundled in coats and scarves, leading horses or carrying supplies. Some of them were starting to notice the commotion. Zelda saw heads turning, heard voices rising in question or alarm, but no one moved to help. This was Harold Whitmore's stepdaughter, and what a man did with his family was his own business, even in 1878, even in California, where the gold had brought people from all walks of life and supposedly more progressive thinking. "Someone help me," Zelda cried out, her voice cracking. "Please!" The piano music in the saloon stopped. More faces appeared at windows and doorways. Still no one moved. Zelda felt something break inside her, some last desperate hope that the world contained more good than evil, more help than harm. She was going to die out here in the snow, and people were going to watch it happen, and then they would go back to their drinks and their dinners and their warm beds. Harold had stopped in the middle of the street, perhaps 10 feet from the saloon's entrance. He was breathing hard, his face red and sweating despite the cold. He still had Zelda's hair twisted around his fist, holding her head at an awkward angle that made it hard to breathe, impossible to look anywhere but up at his rage-twisted face. "You think anyone here cares about you?" he spat. "You think any of these good people are going to help a worthless girl who cannot even keep house properly?" Zelda could not answer. Blood was running into her eye from a cut on her forehead that she did not remember receiving. Her body had gone past shivering into a deeper cold that made her thoughts slow and syrupy. Hypothermia, some distant part of her mind supplied. She had seen it before, had seen miners pulled from the snow looking just like she must look now. "I asked you a question." Harold raised his free hand, and Zelda flinched, knowing what was coming. The blow never landed. One moment Harold was standing over her, hand drawn back, and the next he was on the ground 5 feet away, sprawled in the snow like a felled tree. It took Zelda's shocked mind several seconds to understand what had happened, to see the man standing where Harold had just been, to register the fact that someone had actually intervened. He was tall, this stranger, perhaps 6 feet 2 inches, with broad shoulders under a heavy sheepskin coat that was dusted with snow. His hat had fallen off in the movement, revealing dark brown hair that needed cutting and a face that was all hard angles and purpose. But it was his eyes that caught Zelda's attention, held it even through her pain and confusion. They were a clear, startling blue, the color of summer sky, and they were filled with a cold fury that made Harold's rage look like a child's tantrum. "Get up," the stranger said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the sudden hush that had fallen over the street. His accent marked him as someone from further east, Missouri or Kansas, perhaps. "Get up so I can knock you down again." Harold groaned and rolled onto his side, spitting blood into the snow. His lip was split, already swelling, and Zelda felt a savage satisfaction at the sight. The stranger had hit him. Someone had actually hit Harold, had stopped him, had made him let go. "Stay out of this," Harold slurred, trying to push himself up. "This is family business." "I do not care if she is your daughter, your wife, or the Queen of England," the stranger said, taking a step closer. His boots crunched in the snow. "You do not drag a woman through the snow by her hair. You do not hit someone who cannot fight back. That is not family business. That is cowardice." Harold finally made it to his feet, swaying. He was a big man, used to using his size to intimidate, but the stranger did not back down an inch. They stood perhaps 3 feet apart, Harold breathing hard through his bloody mouth, the stranger perfectly still and balanced like a coiled spring. "She is my stepdaughter," Harold said, as if that explained everything, excused everything. "I will discipline her as I see fit." "No," the stranger said simply. "You will not." Something in his tone, in the absolute certainty of those 4 words, made Harold hesitate. Zelda, still on her hands and knees in the snow, saw her stepfather's eyes dart around the street, looking for support, for someone to back his claim of righteous paternal authority. But the crowd that had gathered was silent, watching, waiting to see how this would play out. "You have no right," Harold started, but he did not sound as certain now. His hand moved toward his belt, where Zelda knew he kept a knife, and the stranger's eyes tracked the movement like a hawk watching a rabbit. "I would not do that if I were you," the stranger said, and now there was something almost gentle in his voice, the way you might warn a child away from a hot stove. "I have already hit you once for what you did to her. If you draw a weapon, I will put you in the ground. Do you understand me?" The silence stretched. Zelda could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the distant sound of the creek that ran behind the building, swollen with snow melt. She was so cold she could barely feel her hands, her feet, but she did not dare move, did not dare draw attention back to herself while these 2 men faced off. Finally, Harold's hand moved away from his belt. He spat blood again and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Fine," he said. "Keep the worthless girl. I do not want her anyway. Nothing but trouble since her mother died." He turned and started walking back toward the cabin, his limp more pronounced now, his shoulders hunched. Zelda watched him go and felt nothing but relief so profound it made her dizzy. He had given up. Harold had actually backed down, had walked away from a fight, and that meant the stranger was dangerous in a way her stepfather recognized and feared. As soon as Harold was far enough away, the stranger turned and knelt in the snow beside Zelda. Up close, she could see details she had missed in the chaos of the past few minutes. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with a scar running through his left eyebrow and another along his jaw. His hands, when he reached out to help her, were scarred across the knuckles in the particular way of someone who had thrown a lot of punches in his life. But his touch was gentle, as he carefully helped her sit back, his eyes scanning her face with an expression that made Zelda's throat tighten. "Are you all right?" he asked, which was such an absurd question given the circumstances that Zelda almost laughed. Almost. What came out instead was something between a sob and a gasp, and then she was shaking uncontrollably, reaction setting in. "Sorry," she managed through chattering teeth. "I am sorry, I cannot seem to stop." "You are freezing," the stranger interrupted. He was already shrugging out of his heavy coat, wrapping it around her shoulders. The warmth of it, still holding his body heat, made Zelda gasp. "We need to get you somewhere warm. Can you stand?" Zelda tried and nearly fell. Her legs would not hold her weight, whether from cold or shock or the injuries to her knees she could not say. The stranger caught her easily, one arm around her waist, supporting most of her weight. "All right," he said calmly, as if this was a perfectly normal situation. Plan B. Before Zelda could ask what Plan B was, he had bent and scooped her up in his arms, carrying her like she weighed nothing at all. Zelda made a small sound of protest, embarrassment flooding through her despite everything. She was aware suddenly of how she must look, her dress torn and soaked, her hair a tangled mess, blood on her face. She was being carried through the main street of Sonora like a child, with half the town watching. "I can walk?" she tried to say, but her voice came out weak and unconvincing even to her own ears. "Maybe," the stranger said, "but you do not have to." He carried her toward the Sonora Hotel, and this time, when he approached, people moved out of the way. The hotel owner, a portly man named Mr. Chen, who had come over from China during the gold rush and stayed to make his fortune in hospitality, held the door open without comment. Inside, the warmth hit Zelda like a wall, and she started shivering even harder, her body trying to readjust. "I need a room," the stranger said to Mr. Chen. "Somewhere with a stove, hot water if you have it, blankets, and send for a doctor." "I do not need a doctor," Zelda protested weakly, but both men ignored her. "Room 3, Mr. Chen said, pulling a key from the board behind his desk. "Top of the stairs, second door on the right. I will bring water and blankets myself. The doctor is out at the Morrison Ranch setting a broken leg, but he should be back by evening." The stranger nodded his thanks and carried Zelda up the narrow staircase. She tried not to notice how solid he felt, how steady, or the way his arms tightened slightly when she shivered. She tried not to think about the fact that a complete stranger was showing her more care in these few minutes than Harold had in 5 years. Room 3 was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a faded quilt, a single chair, and a pot-belly stove in the corner that was already radiating heat. The stranger set Zelda carefully on the chair and immediately went to the stove, adding more wood, adjusting the damper to increase the heat output. "What is your name?" Zelda asked, because she needed to say something, needed to break the strange tension that filled the room. "Fletcher," the stranger said, not turning from the stove. "Fletcher Porter." "Fletcher," Zelda repeated. The name felt solid in her mouth. Dependable. "I am Zelda Whitmore, and I do not know how to thank you for what you did." "You do not need to thank me," Fletcher said. He finally turned from the stove and looked at her directly. Any decent person would have done the same. "But they did not," Zelda said quietly. "They stood and watched. You were the only one who stopped him." Something flickered across Fletcher's face, too quick to identify. He moved closer, crouching down so they were at eye level. "May I look at your injuries?" he asked. "I have some experience with this sort of thing." Zelda nodded, not trusting her voice. Fletcher's examination was quick and thorough, his touch impersonal but careful. He checked the cut on her forehead, the injuries to her knees, the places on her arms and shoulders where Harold's grip had left bruises already starting to purple. "Nothing broken," he said finally. "You are going to be in pain for a few days, but you will heal. The cut on your forehead might scar, but it is not deep enough to need stitches." "How do you know?" Zelda asked. "As about injuries, I mean." Fletcher stood and moved to the washstand in the corner, pouring water from the pitcher into the bowl. "I was in the army for a while," he said. "Cavalry. You learn to patch people up when you are days away from a real doctor." He brought the bowl of water and a clean cloth from his saddlebag and began carefully cleaning the blood from Zelda's face. The water was cold, but his touch was gentle, and Zelda found herself relaxing slightly despite the strangeness of the situation. "You are a long way from cavalry country," she observed. Fletcher's mouth quirked in something that was not quite a smile. "I've been a long way from a lot of things for a while now. I'm a drifter, I suppose. Moving from place to place, taking work where I can find it. Came to Sonora because I heard they might be hiring guards for the mine shipments." "Are they?" Zelda asked, more to keep him talking than because she cared about mine business. "Do not know yet," Fletcher said. He had moved on to cleaning the scrapes on her knees, kneeling in front of her with the kind of focus that suggested he needed to concentrate on this task to avoid thinking about something else. "I only rode in this afternoon. Had not even found a place to stable my horse when I saw—" He trailed off, jaw tightening. "Jaw. When you saw Harold dragging me through the snow," Zelda finished. "You can say it. It happened." Fletcher looked up at her then, and the expression in his blue eyes made Zelda's breath catch. "It should not have happened," he said fiercely. "It should never have happened, and I swear to you it will not happen again." "You cannot promise that," Zelda said, trying for practical, trying not to let his words kindle a hope that would only lead to more hurt. "You will leave Sonora eventually. You just said you are a drifter, and I have nowhere to go, no money of my own. When you leave, Harold will still be here." "Then I will not leave," Fletcher said simply, as if it was the easiest decision in the world. Before Zelda could respond to that absurd statement, there was a knock at the door. Mr. Chen entered with an armful of blankets and a large kettle of hot water, steam rising from its spout. He set them down without comment, though Zelda saw his eyes take in the scene her injuries, Fletcher kneeling at her feet, the careful way he was tending to her. "Thank you," Fletcher said, and Mr. Chen nodded. "The room is paid for a week," Mr. Chen said, "and if Harold Whitmore comes looking, I have not seen either of you." "A week?" Zelda said. "But I cannot afford—" "It is paid for," Fletcher repeated, and from his tone Zelda understood that he was the one who had paid, though she had not seen money change hands. After Mr. Chen left, Fletcher poured the hot water into the wash basin and brought Zelda a cup of it, carefully cooled to drinking temperature. She wrapped her hands around it gratefully, letting the warmth seep into her frozen fingers. "You should get out of that wet dress, Fletcher said, and then immediately looked away, color rising in his cheeks. You will catch pneumonia if you stay in wet clothes. I will wait outside. There is a nightgown in my saddlebag, clean, belonged to my sister. You can use it." He was already moving toward the door before Zelda could process this information. "Fletcher," she called, and he paused with his hand on the doorknob. "Thank you for all of this, for caring." He looked back at her, and something in his expression made Zelda's heart skip. "Get some rest," was all he said, and then he was gone, closing the door quietly behind him. Zelda sat very still for a long moment, listening to the crackle of the stove and the sound of voices drifting up from the street below. Her body hurt in about a dozen different places, her head was pounding, and she had no idea what she was going to do tomorrow, or the day after, or the day after that. But for the first time in 6 months, she felt something other than fear or despair. She felt safe. Moving carefully, mindful of her injuries, Zelda stood and began to peel off her wet dress. The nightgown Fletcher had mentioned was in his saddlebag, just as he had said, soft flannel that had been washed many times. It was too large for her, clearly made for someone taller, but it was clean and dry and warm, and when Zelda pulled it on, she felt some of the tension leave her body. She was just wrapping herself in one of the blankets Mr. Chin had brought when there was another knock at the door. "It is decent," she called, expecting Fletcher. Instead, it was a woman who entered, perhaps 40 years old, with graying brown hair and a capable look about her. She carried a tray with food, bread and cheese, dried apples, a bowl of what smelled like beef stew, and she set it down on the small table by the window before turning to look at Zelda. "I am Mrs. Chen," she said. "My husband told me what happened in the street. I brought food. You need to eat." Zelda had not thought she was hungry, but the smell of the stew made her stomach clench with sudden, desperate need. She could not remember the last time she had eaten anything more substantial than scraps. Harold had been taking more and more of the household money for whiskey, leaving less and less for food. "Thank you," Zelda said, moving to the table. "But I should tell you I cannot pay for this. I do not have any money." Mrs. Chen waved a hand dismissively. "The cowboy paid. He said to bring you food and whatever else you need. He is sitting outside your door like a guard dog. Did you know that?" Zelda had not known, but the information sent a strange warmth through her chest. "He's very kind. He's very taken with you, Mrs." Chen said matter-of-factly. "I saw the way he looked at you, the way he carried you. That is not how a man looks at a stranger he just feels sorry for." "He just met me," Zelda protested, but even she could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Mrs. Chen smiled, the expression transforming her serious face into something almost mischievous. "I met my husband on a Tuesday. He proposed on Thursday. We have been married 23 years. When you know, you know." She left before Zelda could formulate a response to that, pulling the door closed behind her. Zelda stared at the closed door for a long moment, then turned her attention to the food. She ate slowly, mindful of her split lip and the way her stomach had shrunk from months of not enough food. The stew was rich and hearty, the bread fresh enough to still be soft, and by the time she had finished, Zelda felt more human than she had in weeks. She was just setting the tray aside when there was another knock. "Come in," she called, and this time it was Fletcher who entered. He had cleaned up since she had last seen him, she noticed. His face was freshly washed, his hair combed back, and he had changed into a clean shirt. But there was a tension in his shoulders that had not been there before, and his eyes scanned the room as if checking for threats before finally settling on her. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better," Zelda said honestly. "Warm and fed and safe, all thanks to you." Fletcher shook his head slightly. "I did what anyone should have done." "But no one else did," Zelda reminded him. "You keep saying any decent person would have helped, but you were the only one. That makes you different, Fletcher Porter." He looked uncomfortable with her praise, she noticed. He moved to the window, looking out at the street below where the sun was starting to set, painting the snow-covered buildings in shades of orange and gold. "I have been thinking about your situation," Fletcher said after a moment. "You cannot go back to that cabin. I do not care if he is your stepfather, legal guardian, or what the law says. I will not let you go back to a man who would do what I saw today." "I do not want to go back," Zelda said quietly. "But as I said before, I have no money, no family except Harold, no skills that would let me support myself. In case you have not noticed, the world is not particularly kind to women with no resources." "Then we will find you resources," Fletcher said, turning to face her. "There must be work in a town like this. Cooking, cleaning, laundry. Someone must need help." Zelda wanted to believe him, wanted to believe it could be that simple. But she had lived in Sonora for 5 years, and she knew better. "Most of the respectable women will not hire me once they know Harold is my stepfather. They will say I am trouble, that I must have done something to deserve his anger. And the less respectable establishments." She trailed off, but the implication was clear. Fletcher's jaw tightened. "Then you will stay here until we figure something else out. I have enough saved to cover the room for a few weeks at least." "I cannot let you do that," Zelda protested. "You do not even know me." "I know you did not deserve what happened to you today," Fletcher said. "I know you are scared and hurt and trying to be brave about it. I know that when I close my eyes, I see that man dragging you through the snow, and I want to go back and hit him harder. That is enough." The raw honesty in his voice made Zelda's eyes sting with tears she refused to shed. She had cried enough over the past months, and she would not cry now, not when someone was finally trying to help her. "Why?" she asked instead. "Why do you care so much? You said yourself you are a drifter, someone just passing through. You could have kept walking. No one would have blamed you." Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. "I had a sister," he said, "Emma. She was 3 years younger than me, and I thought the world revolved around her. When I joined the cavalry, she wrote me letters every week telling me about her life, her friends, the boy she was sweet on." He paused, and Zelda saw his hands clench into fists at his sides. "When I got out, I came home to find out she had married that boy. He seemed nice enough at first, but it did not take long before I noticed the bruises, the excuses, the way she flinched when he moved too fast." "What happened?" Zelda asked, though part of her was not sure she wanted to know. "I confronted him," Fletcher said. "Told him if he ever laid a hand on her again, I would kill him. He promised he would not. Said it was all a misunderstanding, that he loved Emma and would never hurt her." Fletcher's voice had gone flat, emotionless, in the way of someone reciting something too painful to feel. 2 months later, he beat her so badly she died from her injuries. I was 3 states away looking for work. By the time I got the telegram, she had already been buried for a week. "I am so sorry," Zelda whispered. "Zelda, I should have stayed," Fletcher said. "I should have taken her away from him, law be damned. But I believed him when he said it would not happen again. I believed that people would not let something that bad happen in broad daylight." He turned to look at her directly. "So when I saw what was happening to you today, I did not hesitate. I did not wait for someone else to step in, because I know now that if you want something stopped, you have to stop it yourself." Zelda understood then, understood the fierce protectiveness she had seen in his eyes, the absolute determination in his voice when he had told Harold to leave her alone. Fletcher Porter was a man living with a guilt he could never fully assuage, and helping her was his way of making amends for the sister he had not been able to save. "I am not your sister," Zelda said gently. "You do not owe me anything because of what happened to her." "I know," Fletcher said, "but that does not change the fact that I want to help you, if you will let me." How could she say no to that? How could she reject the first genuine kindness she had been shown in months, maybe years? "All right," Zelda said, "I will let you help. But not because I expect it or feel entitled to it, and not forever. Just until I can figure out how to stand on my own." "Deal," Fletcher said, and for the first time since she had met him, he smiled. It transformed his face, softened the hard edges, and made him look younger, less burdened. Zelda found herself smiling back, a real smile that pulled at her split lip, but felt worth it anyway. They talked as the sun set fully and darkness fell over Sonora. Fletcher told her about his time in the cavalry, the places he had been, the things he had seen. Zelda talked about her mother, the way the consumption had eaten away at her until there was nothing left but skin and bones and a rattle in her chest with every breath. She talked about the early days with Harold, when he had still bothered to pretend to be a good man, and the gradual slide into violence that had come after her mother's death. "Did you ever fight back?" Fletcher asked. "Once," Zelda admitted. "About a month ago. He came home drunk and tried to hit me, and I pushed him. He fell, hit his head on the table, was unconscious for maybe 30 seconds. She wrapped her arms around herself, remembering. When he came to, the look in his eyes was terrifying. He told me if I ever fought back again, he would make sure I regretted it. And then he locked me in the root cellar for 2 days with no food or water just to teach me a lesson." Fletcher's expression had gone cold and dangerous again. He should be in jail. "Probably," Zelda agreed. "But who would put him there? The sheriff is his drinking buddy. Most of the men in town think a man has a right to discipline his household however he sees fit. And I am just his stepdaughter, not even his real daughter. No one cares what happens to me. I care, Fletcher said. And the simple declaration warmed Zelda more than the stove ever could. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with her. The events of the day, the injuries, the emotional upheaval, it all crashed down at once, and Zelda found herself struggling to keep her eyes open. You should sleep, Fletcher said, noticing. I will be right outside if you need anything. You do not have to do that, Zelda protested. You must be exhausted too. I will sleep better knowing you are safe, Fletcher said. Besides, I have slept in worse places than a hotel hallway. Zelda wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She let Fletcher help her to the bed, let him tuck the blankets around her with a care that made her throat tight. Good night, Fletcher, she murmured, already half asleep. Good night, Zelda, he replied. And those were the last words she heard before sleep pulled her under. She woke once in the night, confused and disoriented, her body aching from a dozen different injuries. For a panicked moment, she thought she was back in the cabin, that Harold was coming for her, and she nearly cried out. But then she saw the unfamiliar room, felt the soft bed beneath her, remembered the events of the day, and the panic subsided. She was safe. Fletcher was outside. Harold could not reach her here. Zelda slept better that night than she had in months. Morning came with pale winter light filtering through the window. Zelda woke slowly, her body protesting every movement, but her mind clearer than it had been. She was just contemplating the effort required to get out of bed when there was a soft knock at the door. Come in, she called, expecting Fletcher. Instead, it was Mrs. Chen again, this time carrying a tray with breakfast eggs and bacon, fresh biscuits, a cup of coffee that smelled like heaven. Good morning, she said briskly, setting the tray down. The cowboy said to let you sleep, but I thought you might be hungry. I am, Zelda admitted, sitting up carefully. Everything hurt, but it was the manageable hurt of injuries healing, not the sharp pain of fresh trauma. Thank you. Where is Fletcher? Downstairs talking to my husband, Mrs. Chen said. She helped Zelda adjust the pillows so she could sit up more comfortably. He has been asking about work in town, places that might hire a woman who needs a new start. Zelda's heart gave an odd little skip. He has. Since dawn, Mrs. Chen confirmed. That man does not do anything halfway, does he? Apparently not, Zelda murmured. She picked up a biscuit and bit into it, savoring the buttery flavor. Mrs. Chen, can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you and your husband being so kind to me? You do not know me, and helping me means going against Harold, which could cause problems for your business. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. When my husband and I came to Sonora 15 years ago, people were not kind to us. They did not want Chinese people here, did not want us running a business or owning property, but there were a few good people who stood up for us, who gave us a chance. We decided then that if we ever had the opportunity to help someone who needed it, we would. So this is us keeping that promise. I see, Zelda said softly. Well, I am grateful. More than I can say. After Mrs. Chen left, Zelda finished her breakfast and carefully got out of bed. Her dress from yesterday was ruined, she saw, torn and stained beyond repair. Fletcher's sister's nightgown would not do for going out in public, which meant she needed to find something else to wear. As if summoned by her thoughts, there was another knock at the door. This time it was Fletcher, and he was carrying a bundle wrapped in brown paper. I hope I got the size right, he said, handing it to her. Mrs. Chen said the general store had ready-made dresses, and I described you as best I could, and the shopkeeper's wife seemed to think this would work. Zelda unwrapped the package to find a simple but well-made dress in dark blue wool, along with undergarments, stockings, and even a pair of sturdy boots. The dress had practical buttons up the front and long sleeves that would protect against the cold. It was the kind of dress a respectable working woman would wear, and Zelda felt tears prick her eyes at the thoughtfulness of it. Fletcher, this is too much, she said. You have already done so much eat. It is a dress, Fletcher interrupted, not the moon, and you need clothes, so please just accept it without arguing. Zelda laughed, a surprise sound that hurt her split lip but felt wonderful anyway. You're very bossy, did you know that? So I have been told, Fletcher said, but he was smiling again. I will wait outside while you change. Then, if you're feeling up to it, I thought we could go talk to some people about work. Half an hour later, Zelda was dressed in her new clothes and feeling more like herself than she had since her mother died. The dress fit well enough, perhaps a little loose in the waist, but nothing that could not be fixed with a belt. The boots were comfortable, and it was such a relief to be wearing something clean and dry and intact that Zelda almost did not care about the pain that still shot through her body with every movement. Fletcher was waiting in the hallway as promised, and his eyes widened slightly when he saw her. You look nice, he said, then immediately looked away as if embarrassed by the compliment. Thank you, Zelda said, and thank you for the dress. It is perfect. They walked downstairs together, Fletcher staying close but not touching, as if aware that she might need space after yesterday's trauma. In the hotel lobby, Mr. Chen looked up from his ledger and nodded approvingly at Zelda's appearance. You look like a new woman, he said. Is good. People will take you more seriously if you look respectable. That is what I was hoping, Fletcher said. We are going to ask at the church first. They might know of families who need help. The church was at the far end of the main street, a small white building with a tall steeple that looked like it had been built during the first rush of gold fever. The Reverend, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a kind face, listened to their story edited to remove the most violent details and nodded thoughtfully. I do know of a few families who might need help, he said. The Harrisons just had their 4th child, and Mrs. Harrison has been overwhelmed. The Thompson family runs the bakery, and they have been looking for someone to help with the counter. And then there is the school teacher, Miss Sullivan. She has been trying to find someone to help with the younger children. He gave them directions to each place, and they spent the rest of the morning visiting them. Mrs. Harrison was a frazzled woman with flour in her hair and a baby on her hip, and she practically wept with relief at the idea of hiring help. The Thompsons were friendly but hesitant, clearly worried about what Harold might do if they hired his stepdaughter. And Miss Sullivan, a brisk woman in her 30s, offered Zelda a position on the spot. I can pay $15 a month plus lunch, Miss Sullivan said. The hours are 8 to 3, Monday through Friday. You would help with the youngest students, the ones just learning their letters, keep them focused, help them with their slates, that sort of thing. Can you read and write? Yes, Zelda said. My mother taught me. Excellent. When can you start? Monday? Zelda suggested, glancing at Fletcher. Monday is perfect, Miss Sullivan said. I will see you then, Miss Whitmore. They left the schoolhouse in a daze. Zelda could hardly believe it had been that easy, that someone had just offered her a job, a way to support herself, a path forward that did not involve Harold or desperation or fear. $15 a month, she said wonderingly. That is enough to pay for a room, food. I could actually live on that. It is a good start, Fletcher agreed. He looked pleased, she noticed, like her happiness was his own. Though I should mention, Mr. Chen said you could stay at the hotel for $10 a month if you help his wife with laundry and cooking. That would leave you $5 for everything else. Zelda did the math in her head. $5 was not much, but it was more than she had now. And if she was careful, if she saved every penny she could, then maybe eventually she could have something like a real life. I should go talk to Mrs. Chen, Zelda said. Make sure she actually wants to hire me before I start counting money I do not have yet. But Mrs. Chen was more than happy to make the arrangement, and by the time the sun was setting on Zelda's second day in the hotel, she had a job, a place to live, and the beginnings of a plan. She also had Fletcher, who had appointed himself her unofficial guardian and showed no signs of leaving anytime soon. That evening, they ate dinner together in the hotel dining room, a luxury Zelda knew she would not be able to afford once she was paying her own way, but Fletcher insisted on treating her one more time. Over roast chicken and potatoes, they talked about ordinary things, and Zelda marveled at how normal it felt, how right. Can I ask you something? Zelda said as they were finishing their meal. Of course. What are you going to do now? You came to Sonora looking for work, And you have spent 2 days taking care of me instead. Are you still planning to ask about those mine guard positions?" Fletcher was quiet for a moment, his fork tracing patterns on his plate. "I was thinking I might stay in Sonora for a while," he said finally. "See how things go. I like it here. It seems like a good town." "Fletcher," Zelda said carefully, "you do not have to stay because of me. I appreciate everything you have done truly, but I do not want to be the reason you give up your plans." "You are not making me give up anything," Fletcher said, meeting her eyes. "I am choosing to stay because I want to. Because when I think about leaving, about moving on to the next town and the next job and the next lonely boarding house, I do not want to go. For the first time in 3 years, I am exactly where I want to be." The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Zelda knew she should say something, should acknowledge what he was really saying, but she was afraid. Afraid of hoping too much, of wanting something she could not have, of ruining this fragile new beginning with expectations neither of them could meet. "I am glad you are staying," was what she finally said, and from the way Fletcher's expression softened, she thought he understood everything she was not saying. The days that followed fell into a routine that Zelda found both strange and comforting. She started her job at the schoolhouse, spending her mornings with children who were too young to know about Harold or her past, too innocent to judge her for her circumstances. Miss Sullivan was a good teacher, patient and kind, and she went out of her way to make Zelda feel welcome. In the afternoons and evenings, Zelda helped Mrs. Chen with the hotel work. She washed linens and prepared vegetables and learned to make the dishes that the hotel served its guests. Mrs. Chen was a good teacher too in her way, and she seemed to take genuine pleasure in watching Zelda grow more confident and capable. And through it all, there was Fletcher. He had gotten one of the mine guard positions, it turned out, which meant he was in town regularly, riding along with shipments of ore or silver, making sure they got safely to the assay office or the railroad. It was dangerous work, Zelda knew. There were bandits in the hills who would happily kill a man for the payroll he was guarding. But Fletcher never seemed worried, and he was good at his job. Whenever he was in town, he found time to see Zelda. Sometimes it was just a quick conversation in the hotel lobby, a few words about her day or his. Sometimes he would bring her things: a new shawl, a book she had mentioned wanting to read, once a handful of ribbons in different colors that made her laugh at the extravagance of it. And sometimes, when his schedule allowed and the weather was decent, they would take walks together through Sonora, talking about everything and nothing. It was on one of these walks, 3 weeks after the day he had knocked Harold down in the snow, that Fletcher finally said what had been building between them since the beginning. They were standing on the bridge over the creek, watching the water flow past, swollen with snowmelt and moving fast. Zelda was bundled in her heavy coat and the shawl Fletcher had bought her, but she was still cold, and when she shivered, Fletcher did not hesitate to move closer, sharing his warmth. "Can I tell you something of Wares?" "Mo," he asked, his voice quiet. "Of course. I think I'm falling in love with you," Fletcher said. "Actually, no. I know I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since I first saw you lying in that snow, trying so hard to be brave. I know it is too soon. I know you have been through hell, and the last thing you probably want is some cowboy making things complicated. But I needed to tell you, because hiding it was starting to feel like lying." Zelda's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She turned to look at Fletcher, at his honest face and his worried eyes, and the tension in his shoulders that said he expected her to reject him. "It is not too soon," she said softly, "and you are not making things complicated. You are making them better. Everything is better when you are around. I wake up in the morning and the first thing I think is whether I might see you that day. And when I do see you, everything else just fades away. So if you are falling in love with me, Fletcher Porter, then I should probably tell you that I am falling in love with you too." The smile that broke across Fletcher's face was like sunrise, brilliant and warm and impossible to look away from. "Yeah?" he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "Yeah," Zelda confirmed, and then Fletcher was pulling her close, wrapping his arms around her, and Zelda was leaning into him, letting herself be held, letting herself feel safe and wanted and cherished. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other on the bridge while the world moved around them. Eventually, Fletcher pulled back just enough to look down at her, and Zelda saw in his eyes the question he was too careful to ask. "You can kiss me," she said. "I want you to kiss me." Fletcher's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb gentle against her cheek. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," Zelda said, and then Fletcher was kissing her, soft and careful and sweet, like she was something precious he was afraid of breaking. Zelda kissed him back, pouring into it all the feelings she had been trying not to have, all the hope she had been afraid to feel. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to take care of you," he said, "for as long as you will let me. I am going to make sure you never have to be afraid again." "I know," Zelda whispered. "I trust you." And she did. Despite everything she had been through, despite the way Harold had taught her to fear men and their anger, Zelda trusted Fletcher completely. He had shown her through his actions, through his patience and his kindness and his unwavering support, that he was nothing like her stepfather. That he was, in fact, exactly the kind of man she had dreamed of but never expected to find. The weeks turned into months. Winter gradually loosened its grip on Sonora, the snow melting away to reveal muddy streets and the first green shoots of spring. Zelda settled into her new life, becoming a familiar and respected figure in the town. The children at the school adored her, and Miss Sullivan had already talked about increasing her hours and her pay come the fall. Fletcher continued to work for the mine, but he also started taking odd jobs around town. He helped Mr. Chen fix the hotel's roof. He worked a few days at the livery stable. He picked up shifts as a deputy when the sheriff needed extra help with the prisoner transport. He was making a place for himself in Sonora, putting down roots in a way Zelda suspected he had not done since before his sister died. They saw each other almost every day, though they were careful about propriety. This was 1878, and people talked. And the last thing Zelda needed was for her reputation to be damaged just when she was starting to build a life. But they took walks together, and they ate meals at the hotel, and they talked for hours about their pasts and their dreams and the future they were starting to imagine together. Harold, thankfully, left her alone. Zelda saw him occasionally, usually from a distance, usually drunk and stumbling from the saloon to whatever hole he was living in now. She had heard through the town gossip that he had been evicted from the cabin for not paying rent, that he was living in a shack near the old mines, that he was drinking more than ever. Part of her felt a small, unworthy satisfaction at his downfall. But mostly she just felt relieved that he had apparently decided she was not worth the trouble of pursuing, especially not with Fletcher around. Spring became summer, and on a warm evening in late June, Fletcher asked Zelda to go for a ride with him. They borrowed horses from the livery and rode out of town, following the creek up into the hills where wildflowers bloomed in riots of color, and the air smelled like pine and earth and growing things. They stopped at a clearing where the creek widened into a small pool, the water moving slow and calm. Fletcher spread out a blanket and unpacked the dinner Mrs. Chen had prepared for them: cold chicken, bread, cheese, strawberries that were just coming into season. They ate as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Zelda felt perfectly content, perfectly happy. And when Fletcher took her hand, lacing their fingers together, she squeezed back. "Zelda," Fletcher said after a while, "I want to ask you something, but I need you to know that whatever you answer, it will not change how I feel about you. It will not change anything between us unless you want it to." Zelda's heart started to pound. She thought she knew what was coming, but she was afraid to assume, afraid to hope too much. "All right," she said carefully. Fletcher shifted so he was facing her directly. He still held her hand, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. "I love you," he said. "I am completely, absolutely in love with you. You are the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing I think about before I sleep. You make me want to be better, do better. You make me believe that I can make up for the mistakes I made with my sister by protecting you, by loving you the way you deserve to be loved. Fletcher, Zelda whispered, her eyes stinging with tears. Let me finish, Fletcher said gently. I know we have not been courting for very long, not by most people's standards, but I also know that life is short and unpredictable, and when you find something good, something real, you should hold on to it. So I am asking Zelda Whitmore if you would do me the honor of marrying me, of being my wife, of letting me spend the rest of my life making you happy. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond, modest but pretty. Zelda stared at it, her mind racing. You do not have to answer right now, Fletcher said, misinterpreting her silence. I know this is sudden. I know you might need time to think about it. Yes, Zelda interrupted. Yes, I will marry you. I do not need time to think about it. I love you, Fletcher. I want to be your wife. The expression on Fletcher's face was worth every bad thing Zelda had ever been through, every moment of pain and fear and despair. He looked like she had given him the world, like she had answered every prayer he had ever prayed. He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, and then he was pulling her close, kissing her with a passion they had both kept carefully restrained until now. I promise I will make you happy, Fletcher said against her lips. I promise I will take care of you. I promise you will never regret saying yes. I know, Zelda said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. They were married 3 weeks later in the small white church where they had first asked about work for Zelda. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony, and Mr. and Mrs. Chen stood as witnesses. Zelda wore a new dress, pale blue with lace at the collar, and Fletcher wore his best suit. And when they exchanged vows, Zelda saw tears in his eyes that matched her own. I, Fletcher Alexander Porter, take you, Zelda Marie Whitmore, to be my lawfully wedded wife, Fletcher said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and cherish you for as long as we both shall live. I, Zelda Marie Whitmore, take you, Fletcher Alexander Porter, to be my lawfully wedded husband, Zelda replied. I promise to love you, honor you, stand by you, and trust you for as long as we both shall live. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Fletcher kissed her, and Zelda felt like her heart might burst from happiness. This was her wedding day. She was married to a man she loved, a man who loved her back, a man who had saved her life and then helped her build a new one. The Chens hosted a small celebration at the hotel, inviting Miss Sullivan and a few other people who had been kind to Zelda since she arrived. There was cake and music and laughter, and Zelda danced with her new husband and thought that she had never been happier in her entire life. Fletcher had rented a small house on the outskirts of town, 2 rooms with a kitchen and a stove and windows that let in the morning light. It was not much, but it was theirs. And when he carried her over the threshold that night, Zelda felt like she was finally truly home. Their first night as husband and wife was gentle and sweet. Fletcher careful with her in a way that made Zelda fall in love with him all over again. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their new bed, and Zelda traced the scars on Fletcher's chest, the ones from his cavalry days, the ones from fights and falls and a life lived hard. Do you ever regret it? She asked quietly. Stopping that day? Hitting Harold? If you had just kept walking, you could be anywhere right now. I do not regret it for a second, Fletcher said immediately. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Zelda. Meeting you, falling in love with you, marrying you, these are the best decisions I have ever made. I would hit Harold 1,000 times if it meant I got to be here with you. Zelda smiled and kissed him. I love you, Fletcher Porter. I love you too, Zelda Porter, he replied, and the sound of her new name made Zelda's heart skip. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Money was tight, and Fletcher's work was dangerous, and there were days when Zelda worried herself sick until he came home safe. There was also the constant low-level concern about Harold, who was still in Sonora, still occasionally seen stumbling drunk through the streets. But Fletcher had made it clear to anyone who would listen that if Harold came near his wife, there would be consequences, and apparently Harold believed him because he stayed away. Zelda continued to work at the school, and she discovered that she loved teaching, loved watching children's faces light up when they finally understood a concept. Miss Sullivan became a good friend, one of the first real friends Zelda had ever had, and they spent their lunch breaks talking about books and life and the future. Fletcher thrived in Sonora, too. He was good at his job, respected by the other guards and the mine owners. He was also building a reputation as someone you could count on, someone who would help a neighbor fix a fence or deliver firewood to a widow or break up a fight without killing anyone. People liked him, trusted him, and Zelda was proud to be his wife. In the spring of 1879, Zelda realized she was pregnant. She told Fletcher over dinner one evening, watching his face carefully for his reaction. For a moment he just stared at her, processing, and then he whooped with joy, picking her up and spinning her around until she was laughing and dizzy. "We are having a baby," he kept saying, like he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." "You are not scared?" Zelda asked once he had set her down. "Terrified," Fletcher admitted, "but also excited, mostly excited. We are going to be good parents, Zelda. We are going to give this child everything we did not have." "I know," Zelda said, resting her hand on her still flat stomach. "I know we will." She stopped working at the school in her 6th month, when the children started asking innocent questions about why Miss Zelda was getting fat, and she missed it, but also enjoyed having time to prepare for the baby. Fletcher was constantly worried about her, hovering and fretting and driving her slightly crazy with his concern, but Zelda found she did not really mind. It was nice to be cared for, to have someone who worried about her well-being. Their son was born on a cold December morning, almost exactly 2 years after Fletcher had knocked Harold down in the snow. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Zelda was scared, but Fletcher held her hand through all of it. And when the baby finally arrived, healthy and screaming, Zelda cried with relief and joy. "He is perfect," Fletcher said, his voice thick with emotion as he held his son for the first time. "He looks like you." "He looks like you," Zelda countered, seeing Fletcher's blue eyes and strong features in the tiny face. They named him Thomas, after Fletcher's father, and he was the light of their lives. Zelda had never known she could love someone so much, so instantly and completely. And watching Fletcher with their son, seeing the gentleness and care he showed, made her fall in love with her husband all over again. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Thomas grew from a baby to a toddler, learning to walk and talk and get into trouble. Zelda returned to teaching part-time once Thomas was old enough, bringing him with her to the school where he played with the other children and started learning his letters almost before he could talk properly. Fletcher was promoted to head guard at the mine, a position that came with better pay and a bit less danger. They were able to move to a bigger house, one with 3 bedrooms and a real parlor and a kitchen large enough for Zelda to cook and bake to her heart's content. They adopted a dog, a scruffy mutt that Thomas named Bear, and they planted a garden that produced vegetables all summer long. In 1882, their daughter was born, a tiny thing with Zelda's auburn hair and Fletcher's blue eyes. They named her Emma, after Fletcher's sister, and Zelda saw in Fletcher's face how much it meant to him to honor his sister's memory this way. Emma was a quieter child than Thomas had been, content to sit and observe the world, but she had a smile that could light up a room. Harold Whitmore died in the winter of 1883, found frozen in his shack after a particularly cold night. He had been alone, drunk, and Zelda felt nothing when she heard the news except a distant relief that he could never hurt anyone again. Fletcher held her that night, sensing that even though she felt no grief, the news had still affected her. "It is over now," he said quietly. "That part of your life is completely over." "It was over the day you hit him," Zelda replied. "The day you saved me. Everything else has just been me living the life you made possible." "No," Fletcher said firmly. "I gave you a chance maybe, but you built this life. You made the choice to be brave, to trust me, to work hard and make a place for yourself. I am proud of you, Zelda. So proud." By 1885, Sonora had grown from a rough mining town into something more settled, more permanent. The mine was still operating, but there were also farms and businesses and families putting down roots. The Porters were part of that change, respected members of the community. Fletcher had been asked to run for sheriff, though he had declined, saying he preferred his current work. Zelda had become the head teacher at the school when Miss Sullivan retired, and she loved her work. Thomas was 6 years old, attending the same school where his mother taught, clever and curious and full of energy. Emma was 3, following her big brother everywhere, copying everything he did. They were happy children, loved and secure, and sometimes Zelda would watch them playing and marvel at how different their lives were from her own childhood. On a summer evening in 1886, Fletcher and Zelda sat on the porch of their house, watching their children chase fireflies in the yard. Bear was dozing at Fletcher's feet, and the air was warm and sweet with the smell of the roses Zelda had planted by the fence. "Do you ever think about that day?" Fletcher asked quietly. "The day we met?" "Sometimes," Zelda admitted, "though it feels like a different lifetime now, like that scared girl in the snow was someone else entirely." "She was brave," Fletcher said. "Even then, even when she had every reason to give up, she kept fighting." "I kept fighting because you gave me a reason to," Zelda said. She reached over and took Fletcher's hand, their fingers lacing together in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the years. "You saved my life that day, Fletcher, in every way that matters." "We saved each other," Fletcher countered. "I was lost before I met you, drifting from place to place looking for something I could not name. And then I saw you, and I knew. You were what I had been looking for, a reason to stop running, a reason to stay." Zelda leaned her head on his shoulder, perfectly content. "I love you," she said, "more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," Fletcher replied. "Always have, always will." They sat like that as the sun set, watching their children play, listening to the sounds of their peaceful town. It had been 8 years since Fletcher Porter had stopped Harold Whitmore with one punch, 8 years since he had saved a young woman from dying in the snow. And in those 8 years, they had built a life together that was everything Zelda had never dared to dream of. In 1888, their second son was born, another healthy baby boy they named Samuel. The birth was easier this time, and Zelda recovered quickly, eager to get back to her children and her work. Thomas was 8 now, responsible enough to help with his younger siblings, and Emma was a devoted big sister to baby Samuel. Fletcher had finally agreed to become sheriff in 1887, after the previous sheriff died of a heart attack, and the town council begged him to take the position. It suited him, Zelda thought. He was fair and firm, respected and trusted. He broke up fights without unnecessary violence, mediated disputes, and kept Sonora safe and peaceful. The wild days of the town were largely over, replaced by a more settled, civilized community, but there was still occasional need for a man who could handle himself in a dangerous situation. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Zelda watched her children grow, watched them learn and play and become their own people. Thomas wanted to be a teacher like his mother. Emma loved horses and spent every spare moment at the livery stable. Samuel, still young, was too little to know what he wanted, but he was a happy child, always laughing, always into something. Fletcher was a wonderful father, patient and kind, and involved in his children's lives in a way that Zelda knew was rare for men of their time. He taught Thomas to ride and shoot, taught Emma to be brave and stand up for herself, and spent hours playing with Samuel, building blocks and toy horses and letting the little boy climb all over him. Watching Fletcher with their children, Zelda sometimes thought about his sister Emma, about the nieces and nephews he should have had, and she was grateful that he had gotten this second chance at family. In the fall of 1890, Harold's old cabin burned down. It had been abandoned for years, and no one knew if the fire was accidental or deliberate, but Zelda stood with Fletcher and watched the flames, feeling like the last connection to her old life was finally truly gone. The cabin had been a place of pain and fear, and its destruction felt like a cleansing, a final ending to that chapter of her story. "Good riddance," Fletcher said quietly, his arm around her waist. "Good riddance," Zelda agreed. By 1892, Thomas was 14 and talking about going to college, maybe becoming a professor someday. Zelda and Fletcher were saving money for his education, determined that their children would have opportunities they had never had. Emma was 10, still horse crazy, talking about wanting to be a rancher when she grew up. Samuel was 4, full of energy and mischief, keeping them all on their toes. Fletcher had been sheriff for 5 years, and he was good at it, beloved by the community. Zelda was still teaching, still loving her work, still marveling at the fact that this was her life, that she got to wake up every day in a warm house with a man she loved and children who were safe and happy. On their 14th wedding anniversary, Fletcher surprised Zelda with a trip. They left the children with Mrs. Chen, who had become like a grandmother to them over the years, and they rode out to the clearing by the creek where Fletcher had proposed all those years ago. "I wanted to come back here," Fletcher said as they spread out a blanket in the same spot they had sat in 1878. "To remember where we started, to think about how far we have come." Zelda looked around at the clearing, at the wildflowers and the creek and the trees. "It looks the same," she said. "But we are not," Fletcher replied. "We are older, wiser. We are parents. We are settled and happy. We have built a life that I never thought I would have." "Me either," Zelda admitted. She leaned against Fletcher, his arm coming around her shoulders automatically. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is real, that I get to have this, have you, have our children, have this life." "It is real," Fletcher assured her, "and you deserve every bit of it. You deserve to be happy, Zelda. You deserve to be loved and safe and surrounded by people who care about you." "I know," Zelda said. "I finally truly know that. It took me a long time to believe it, but I do now. And it is all because of you, because you saw someone worth saving when everyone else looked away, because you loved me when I did not know how to love myself." They stayed at the clearing until sunset, talking and laughing and remembering. They talked about the early days of their marriage, the challenges they had faced, the joy they had found. They talked about their children and their hopes for their futures. They talked about growing old together, about grandchildren and rocking chairs and a lifetime of quiet contentment. As they rode back to Sonora in the gathering dark, Zelda felt a deep sense of gratitude for her life, for the man riding beside her, for the children waiting at home. She had been saved from death in the snow by a stranger with blue eyes and a strong sense of right and wrong, and that single act of intervention had changed the entire trajectory of her existence. The years continued their steady march. Thomas left for college in 1894, heading to San Francisco to study education. It was hard to let him go, but Zelda was proud of the young man he had become, confident and kind and passionate about making a difference in the world. He wrote letters home every week, telling them about his classes and his friends and his dreams. Emma, at 12, had indeed started working at the ranch just outside of town, helping with the horses in exchange for riding lessons and a small wage. She had Fletcher's determination and Zelda's compassion, and she was beloved by everyone who met her. Samuel was 6 now, attending the school where his mother taught, clever like his older brother, but with a playful streak that kept everyone entertained. In 1896, Zelda turned 37, and Fletcher turned 43. They were not young anymore, Zelda sometimes thought, seeing the silver in Fletcher's hair and the lines around his eyes. But they were happy, and that was what mattered. They had built a life together that had weathered every storm, and Zelda knew that whatever the future brought, they would face it together. Their 4th child, a daughter they named Grace, was born in the spring of 1897, a surprise, and a blessing. Zelda had thought she was done having children, but Grace arrived healthy and perfect, and Zelda fell in love all over again with the tiny life in her arms. Fletcher was equally besotted, and watching him with their infant daughter, Zelda marveled at how this man who had seen so much hardness and violence could be so impossibly gentle. Thomas came home from college for the summer and met his baby sister, holding her with careful reverence. "She is so small," he said wonderingly. "Was I ever this small?" "You were," Zelda assured him, "though you were never this quiet." The family gathered together that summer, all 6 of them, and Zelda took a mental picture of the moment Fletcher holding Grace, Thomas, and Emma arguing good-naturedly about something, Samuel showing off his new trick of standing on his head. This was her family. These were the people she loved most in the world, and she had almost missed all of it, almost died in the snow before any of this could happen. As the years moved toward the turn of the century, Sonora continued to change and grow. The mine was less central to the town's economy now, with more people making their living from ranching and farming and businesses. The railroad had come through, connecting Sonora to the wider world. There was talk of electricity and automobiles and all the modern conveniences that were transforming America. Fletcher had been sheriff for over a decade, and he showed no signs of retiring, though he was in his late 40s now and sometimes complained about his knees in the morning. Zelda had become something of an institution at the school, beloved by generations of children who called her Mrs. Porter with a respect that still made her proud. Their children were growing up happy and healthy, each one finding their own path in the world. In the summer of 1899, Thomas graduated from college and came home to Sonora to take a position as a teacher at the high school. He was 21 years old, confident and educated, and Zelda cried with pride at his graduation ceremony. Emma was 17, beautiful and capable, spending all her time at the ranch and talking about buying her own land someday. Samuel was 11, still full of energy, talking about wanting to be a lawman like his father, and Grace was 2, a bright, curious toddler who followed her father everywhere and called him Papa in a way that melted Fletcher's heart every time. On New Year's Eve of 1899, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the Porter family gathered on their porch to watch fireworks the town had organized. Fletcher stood behind Zelda, his arms around her waist, both of them watching their children's faces light up with each explosion of color in the night sky. 22 years, Fletcher said quietly, his breath warm against Zelda's ear. 22 years since I found you in the snow? 22 years since you saved me, Zelda corrected. 22 years since we saved each other, Fletcher said. And I would do it all again, every single moment, just to end up right here with you. Zelda turned in his arms and kissed him, not caring that their children were watching and probably making faces. I love you, Fletcher Porter. Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for caring. Thank you for giving me this life. Always, Fletcher said simply, always and forever. As the fireworks continued to light up the sky and the new century began, Zelda thought about that scared girl in the snow, the one who had thought she was going to die in the cold while the world watched and did nothing. She thought about how one man's decision to intervene, to stop the violence, to care about a stranger had changed everything. And she thought about the life that had grown from that single moment of courage, a marriage built on love and trust, children who were safe and loved, a community where they belonged, decades of happiness and purpose, all of it traceable back to one cold December day when a cowboy with blue eyes had stopped a stepfather from dragging his stepdaughter through the snow, stopped him with one punch, and in doing so had saved 2 lives instead of just one. The years continued to unfold with their steady rhythm of joy and challenge, growth and change. By 1905, Thomas was 27 and married to a sweet woman named Catherine who taught at the school with Zelda. They had given Fletcher and Zelda their first grandchild, a little boy they named Fletcher Thomas Porter, and holding his tiny grandson for the first time had made Fletcher cry in a way Zelda had rarely seen. Emma, at 23, had indeed bought her own land and was running a successful horse ranch with her husband, a quiet man named James who loved her fierce independence and never tried to tame it. They had no children yet, but they had a house full of dogs and horses and laughter, and Emma had never been happier. Samuel was 17, preparing to follow his father into law enforcement. He had Fletcher's sense of justice and Zelda's compassion, and Zelda knew he would be an excellent lawman when the time came. Grace was 8, still the baby of the family, clever and mischievous and absolutely adored by her older siblings. Fletcher was 52 now, still serving as sheriff. Though he had trained several deputies to handle most of the day-to-day work, his hair was more silver than brown, and he moved a bit slower than he once had, but his eyes were still that same startling blue, and his love for Zelda had not dimmed a single degree in 27 years of marriage. Zelda was 46, still teaching, still finding joy in watching children learn and grow. She had gray in her auburn hair now, and lines around her eyes and mouth, but Fletcher still told her she was beautiful, and she believed him because she could see the truth of it in his eyes every time he looked at her. On a warm spring day in 1906, Zelda and Fletcher took a walk through Sonora, holding hands like young lovers despite their age and their grown children. They passed the hotel where Zelda had first stayed, the church where they had married, the school where Zelda had taught for nearly 3 decades. Every street held memories, every building part of their story. "Do you remember that day?" Zelda asked as they paused by the spot where Fletcher had knocked Harold down. "Right here? This is where everything changed?" "I remember," Fletcher said. "I remember being so angry I thought I might lose control completely. I remember seeing you lying in the snow and thinking that if I did not do something, you were going to die. I remember the way you looked at me after, like you could not believe someone had actually helped you." "I could not believe it," Zelda said. "No one had helped me in so long. I had started to think no one cared whether I lived or died." "I cared," Fletcher said fiercely. "From the moment I saw you, I cared, and I have never stopped caring. You are the best thing in my life, Zelda. You and our children and the family we have built together. You are everything." Zelda kissed him right there in the middle of the street, not caring who saw or what they thought. "You are everything to me, too," she said. "You gave me a life worth living. You gave me love and safety and happiness. You gave me children and grandchildren and a future I never thought I would have. How do I ever thank you for that?" "You do not need to thank me," Fletcher said, the same thing he had said 28 years ago in a hotel room when she had tried to express her gratitude. "Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. You do not owe me thanks for that." They continued their walk, eventually ending up at the cemetery on the edge of town. They visited Fletcher's mother's grave. She had passed away 3 years prior, at the age of 78. And then they stood together in front of a small stone that bore Emma's name, Fletcher's sister, the one he had not been able to save. "I hope she knows," Fletcher said quietly, as he always did when they visited. "I hope she knows that I did not forget her, that I tried to honor her memory by being better, by helping people, by making sure what happened to her would not happen to others if I could prevent it." "She knows," Zelda said softly, "and she would be proud of you. Proud of the man you became, the father you are, the life you have lived. You did make a difference, Fletcher. You have made a difference to so many people, but most of all to me." They stood in silence for a while, paying their respects, and then they walked back toward town as the sun began to set. They were getting older, Zelda knew. Fletcher's knees bothered him more than he admitted, and Zelda sometimes felt tired in a way she never had when she was younger. But they had each other, and they had built something that would last beyond their lifetimes, a family, a legacy of love and courage and standing up for what was right. The years that followed brought their own share of blessings. Thomas and Catherine had 3 more children, giving Fletcher and Zelda 4 grandchildren by 1910. Emma and James finally had a baby girl in 1908, a daughter they named Zelda after her grandmother, and holding her tiny namesake made Zelda's heart overflow with love. Samuel became a deputy in 1908 and was already being talked about as Fletcher's eventual successor as sheriff. Grace was 13, in that awkward stage between childhood and womanhood, beautiful and smart and full of dreams about her future. In 1912, Fletcher finally retired as sheriff at the age of 59, passing the badge to Samuel, who wore it with the same integrity and compassion his father had shown. Fletcher found he enjoyed retirement, spending his days helping Emma at the ranch, playing with his grandchildren, and sitting on the porch with Zelda, talking about everything and nothing. Zelda retired from teaching that same year, ready to rest after nearly 35 years of shaping young minds. The town threw her a retirement party, and dozens of former students came to tell her how much she had meant to them, how she had changed their lives. Zelda cried through most of it, overwhelmed by the love and appreciation, by the realization of how much good she had been able to do with the second chance Fletcher had given her. In the summer of 1918, as the world dealt with war and pandemic, the Porter family gathered for Fletcher's 65th birthday. All 4 of their children were there, along with 7 grandchildren ranging in age from infant to 16. They filled the house with noise and laughter and love, and as Zelda looked around at the family that had grown from that desperate moment in the snow 40 years ago, she felt a profound sense of peace and completion. That evening, after everyone else had gone home, Fletcher and Zelda sat on their porch in the gathering dark, holding hands and watching the stars come out. They were old now, their bodies slowing down, their hair completely gray, their faces lined with the evidence of a life well lived. 40 years, Zelda said softly. 40 years since that December day. Best decision I ever made, Fletcher said as stopping, getting involved, refusing to walk away. Best thing that ever happened to me, Zelda replied. Being saved by a cowboy who cared enough to stop my stepfather with one punch. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that came from decades of knowing each other, of being completely comfortable in each other's presence. Finally, Fletcher spoke again. Do you have any regrets, Kia? He asked. Anything you wish had been different? Zelda thought about it seriously, reviewing their 40 years together, the challenges they had faced, the losses they had endured. No, she said finally, I do not have any regrets. Everything that happened, good and bad, led us to this moment, led us to this life, and I would not change a single thing. Neither would I, Fletcher agreed, except maybe I would have hit Harold twice instead of once. Zelda laughed, the sound bright and genuine in the darkness. You are terrible. I am honest, Fletcher corrected. That man deserved worse than one punch for what he did to you. But one punch was enough, Zelda reminded him. One punch stopped him. One punch saved me. One punch changed everything. And that is all that matters. Fletcher brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. I love you, Zelda Porter. I have loved you for 40 years, and I will love you for however many years we have left. I love you too, Zelda said. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for giving me this beautiful life. They sat together as the night deepened around them, 2 people who had found each other at the worst moment of one life and the best moment of another, 2 people who had built something lasting and good and true. The wild west of their youth was long gone, replaced by automobiles and telephones and a rapidly modernizing world. But the love they had found in that old frontier town remained as strong as ever, a testament to the power of one person choosing to care, to act, to make a difference. And somewhere in the stars above, Zelda liked to think that Fletcher's sister Emma was looking down, proud of the man her brother had become, grateful that he had found the happiness and redemption he so deeply deserved, content in the knowledge that her death had not been meaningless because it had led Fletcher to save Zelda, and in saving Zelda, he had saved himself. The story that had begun with violence in the snow had become a story of love and family and hope, proof that even in the darkest moments, even when it seemed like no one cared and no one would help, Sometimes all it took was one person with the courage to stop, to act, to make a difference. Sometimes all it took was one punch to change two lives forever. And as Fletcher and Zelda Porter sat together on their porch, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built, they knew that they had been blessed beyond measure, that their love had endured every test, and that their story, which had begun so terribly, had found the happiest of endings.